The tension between the United States and Mexico has reached new heights. A daring act by the Mexican government has put the lives of countless migrants on the line, while the US is pushing to send them back home in massive numbers.
Defining undocumented migrants as invaders means US officials don't have to offer them asylum, they can simply put them out.
In the latest twist, Mexico blocked one of President Trump's mass deportation planes, creating a storm of uncertainty and fear.
But the plan to have a C-17 transport aircraft land in Mexico did not move ahead, after the country denied permission.
But as US troops storm the border, a new chapter begins in the tragic saga of migration. Today, we uncover the heart-wrenching truth behind the events that have shaken both nations to their core.
Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you.
And from day one of assuming office, U.S. President Donald Trump has been on an immigration crackdown blitz.
Every day, people make the dangerous journey across the border, searching for a better life, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare that no one should have to endure. The situation at the US-Mexico border has been growing more tense, more chaotic. Migrants, fleeing violence, poverty, and hopelessness, have long risked everything to find safety. But what happens when hope is dashed by forces beyond their control? Mexico, traditionally a safe passage for many, now finds itself standing at the center of an international conflict. When the US administration under President Trump tried to force mass deportations, it looked like an impossible situation until Mexico blocked the deportation planes. This bold move left both nations reeling, and with US troops deployed at the border, tensions are at an all-time high. But what does this mean for the lives caught in between? As the border tensions grew, Mexico's government found itself in the center of a crisis not of their making. Forced to choose between being a puppet of the US or standing up for its people, Mexico made a decision that would resonate for generations. Migration is not a story of simple journeys, it's a story of survival, of people running from violence, poverty, and a future filled with uncertainty. Each migrant has a name, a family, and a story that remains untold. As the world watches this conflict unfold, we must remember that every number in the headlines represents a person, a soul yearning for safety, a mother clutching her child, a father doing whatever it takes to provide for his family. The tragedy of this migration crisis is that while political leaders debate and make decisions from the comfort of their offices, those on the ground suffer. They endure hardship that most can't even imagine, and yet they carry on. The origins of this conflict go much deeper than just one single event. This clash is rooted in years of tension between the two neighboring countries. For years, Mexico has dealt with the fallout from US immigration policies. The constant pressure to manage the flow of migrants has taken a toll on Mexico, a country already struggling with its own challenges. As the US adopted stricter immigration policies,
all illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came.
Mexico was forced into a difficult position. Either comply and risk worsening the conditions of the migrants crossing through its country, or take a stand against policies that dehumanize people in search of a better life. The Pentagon was planning to start deporting high-priority criminal migrants to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, as part of President Trump's intensified measures against illegal immigration. 2 military flights are scheduled to transport migrants to the US military base in Guantanamo, with a third flight planned for Peru. Since President Trump took office on January 20th, 8 deportation flights have been completed to Guatemala, Honduras, and Ecuador. Trump's recent memorandum instructs the Defense Department and Department of Homeland Security to expand detention facilities at Guantanamo Bay, targeting up to 30,000 migrants deemed too dangerous to be handled by their home countries.
Deportation flights have long been a part of immigration enforcement, but as we've reported, the Trump administration is now using military planes.
On January 25, 2025, Mexico denied permission for a US military aircraft carrying deported migrants to land on its soil. This refusal occurred despite 2 other US Air Force C-17 flights successfully transported approximately 160 deportees to Guatemala earlier that day. When news broke that Mexico had blocked Trump's deportation plane, many were left wondering how this could even happen. For years, Mexico had quietly complied with US immigration demands, but now they had taken a stand. The impact was immediate and powerful. Mexico's government knew that forcing thousands of their own people back to a life they had already fled was a death sentence for many. But as they defied the US, they became the target of a political storm that threatened their very stability. In response to the evolving situation, the US military has resumed its traditional roles at the US-Mexico border. Marines have been deployed to install concertina wire near San Diego, aiming to enhance border security. This deployment adheres to the Posse Comitatus Act, which limits direct military involvement in civilian law enforcement. President Donald Trump has indicated potential unprecedented actions, such as invoking the Insurrection Act to use military forces against narcotics and mass migration, similar to Texas Governor Greg Abbott's Operation Lone Star. For the migrants standing at the border, it wasn't just an issue of being sent back or allowed entry, it was about survival. Imagine the feeling of watching soldiers approach, knowing that they stand between you and the dream of a better life. Some are met with tear gas, others with barbed wire and barriers. The human cost of this crisis is unimaginable. Families hold on to the faint hope that somehow, against all odds, they will be allowed to step into the safety they've been longing for. Claudia Sheinbaum, President of Mexico's insight on the current events is that Mexico will not permit the use of our soil for forced deportation flights without a transparent process that guarantees the safety and rights of individuals. Mexico's refusal to accept certain US deportation flights was not made lightly. It was a necessary measure to preserve the human dignity of those affected and to ensure that all procedures follow due process and respect for international human rights standards. Mexico will not allow the mistreatment of its people or of migrants in transit. The refusal of some US deportation flights is a direct response to the lack of clear processes and respect for the rights of these individuals. They will not be complicit in their return to situations of danger or injustice. Mexico demands that any immigration enforcement be carried out with full respect for international human rights laws and that all deportations are conducted in a transparent and accountable manner. Mexico's decision to block Trump's mass deportation plane was not just a political statement. It was a desperate cry for justice, a stance against a system that has long pushed migrants into desperate situations. This was a move to protect the lives of those fleeing violence, poverty, and disaster, people who were desperate to find safety in a new land. The United States, under Trump, is aggressively deporting people back to countries like Mexico, many of whom had crossed into America in search of a better life. But the decision by Mexico to block that plane was a powerful response. It was a statement not just to the United States, but to the entire world. Mexico was making it clear that they couldn't allow this kind of inhumane action to continue unchecked. For those in power, it was a bold political maneuver. But for those on the ground, it was the difference between life and death. As the border tensions grew, Mexico's government found itself in the center of a crisis not of their making. Forced to choose between being a puppet of the US or standing up for its people, Mexico made a decision that would resonate for generations. The repercussions of Mexico's decision were immediate and far-reaching. The United States, in response to this bold move, sent troops to storm the border. The clashes between military forces and migrants became more violent, the desperation more palpable. With the US focusing on its own agenda, the migrants already living in fear found themselves caught in the crossfire. The impact was devastating. Families who had already lost so much, who had fled their homes in search of safety, were now forced to live in an even greater nightmare. The border became a symbol of division, not just between two countries, but between the hope of a better life and the harsh reality of survival. For the US, Mexico's retaliation was a clear challenge to its authority. But for the migrants, it became another chapter in their tragic journey. Every day, they risked everything to make it across that border. Yet despite the odds stacked against them, they held on to the hope that just maybe, this time would be different. But even in this moment of resistance, Mexico's actions came with its own limitations. Despite the boldness of their decision to block the deportation plane, the country faced overwhelming pressure from the United States and other international actors. Mexico, though determined, had limited resources to address the mass migration crisis on its own. It wasn't enough to simply block a deportation plane or send a message to the US. There were still the realities of poverty, violence, and corruption that migrants continued to face. Even as Mexico stood firm, the question remained: how long could this resistance last? How long could they stand against a powerful neighbor that had the means to crush any opposition? The conflict wasn't just political, it was about the lives of the people caught in the middle, people who had no choice but to endure whatever came their way.
We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy.
As the political leaders of Mexico and the US stand on opposite sides, one concern remains: what happens next? The path forward seems uncertain, with both nations grappling with their own internal conflicts and external pressures. Will the deportation planes take off once more? Will the troops continue to stand guard at the border, pushing back the flood of desperate souls trying to find their way? Will the US and Mexico come to an agreement, or will this struggle escalate even further? For the migrants, the only certainty they have is uncertainty. Their future hangs in the balance, and we can only hope that compassion and humanity will prevail over the political battles that rage on. The world is watching closely. A moment of immense tension is unfolding right before our eyes, one that could change everything. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Don't forget to subscribe for more updates on this ongoing crisis.